we will get started with today's webinar session. I have a pleasure to introduce you to Andrea. She is a founder of studywithandrea.com and eslbasics.com and has taught over 1 million students across 180 countries on the globe. She has a decade-long experience as an ESL expert, and she would be taking today's session, how to keep your students engaged online, organized in association with Andrea and ISEL. Over to you, Andrea.
All right, thank you, Drew. We'll go ahead and get started then. Thank you so much to ISEL for having me today, to Tarun Patel, and then also Drew, thank you for producing today's session. Thank you everyone for joining today. Like he said, my name is Andrea Giordano, and I'll pull up a little bit of where you can find me online. So I live in Nashville, Tennessee in the United States, the home of country music. And I live here with my husband and 3 kids. I have a 2-year-old, a 6-year-old, and an 8-year-old. If you have young kids, I'm right in the thick of it with you there. So I'm the co-founder of studywithandrea.com and eslbasics.com, like Drew mentioned. I've been doing that since 2008. Back when that was a relatively new concept to teach online. I also I have 2 podcasts. One is called English with Andrea. That's the English with Andrea podcast. And then I also do a citizenship test training podcast for those who are becoming US citizens. You can also find me on YouTube at youtube.com/studywithandrea. So those are all the places we can connect. I would also love to hear from you over email. My email is on the screen there, andrea@studywithandrea.com. If there is any way we could ever collaborate or any way that I can help you professionally, I would love to help you. So please do reach out and contact me. I would love to connect. So let me tell you a little bit more about my background. My background is in higher education. So I directed an ESL program and a TESOL graduate program and undergraduate program in higher education for a private university in Kentucky for about 10 years. When I became the director of the graduate and TESOL program, I was tasked with the job to move it from face-to-face to fully online. So this was, around, I want to say 2014, 2015, somewhere in there. And at the time, online education was growing and booming. And I said, we need to get into this sphere because it's going to grow enrollment. And it's also something I'm very comfortable doing, teaching online. So we moved that graduate program to the online modality, and we saw a 300% growth in student enrollment within the very first year. That experience taught me that students are crazy about learning online. And we certainly know that it's everywhere today. Learning online is not going away, and it's important that we know how to engage our students. So in today's webinar, I want to give you a little bit of context about what we will be talking about and what we won't be talking about today. So what we will be talking about is, our main focus is live engagement in the live classroom, how to engage your students in that synchronous environment. I could talk about student engagement in the asynchronous environment, but I'll save that for another day. We're mainly going to focus on what do you do when you have students on a Zoom call or on Adobe Connect or WebEx Training Center. How do you engage those students? It's all about that live language class today. So we really are in a new era of teaching. Ready or not, online education is the norm in 2020. There are a lot of factors that led to this moment, of course, with coronavirus being one of the top ones. And for some of you, this is a brand new area for you to teach online. You might be excited about that challenge, and for others, you might be wondering how you're ever going to adapt to this new normal. So I would love to hear in the chat, How many years have you been teaching online? The answer may be 0. The answer may be 10, whatever it is. Tell us in the chat, how many years have you been teaching online? 4 months, I see that. 0, great. 18 years. Sawarna, we should have you teaching this today. 1 year, great. 40 years. Let's see, teaching online, specifically online. So I know we have some veteran teachers here in the group, but how long have you been specifically teaching online? 4 months, 4 months. That's a really common number there, that 4 months. That's about when things got serious, right? When we had to move online. 1 year, 1 month, 6 months. Thanks so much for contributing. So I know a lot of you are brand new to teaching online, and I want to kind of encourage you here to keep in mind that even the most expert online teacher has only been teaching live online classes for a maximum of about 10 to 15 years. So that means that it's a relatively new way of doing things. So if you feel like, oh, I've only been doing it 4 months, I feel overwhelmed, how will I ever learn this? Just keep in mind, even the most expert people in this field now have only been doing it about 10 years. So you're not alone. It is a steep learning curve. It can feel that way when you're used to teaching face-to-face, but just keep in mind that everyone feels that way in the beginning. And those overwhelming feelings are probably not too dissimilar to when you first started teaching, right? We all have those butterfly in the stomach, nervous feelings when we think about our first year of teaching and how intimidating that can be. And that's how it can feel all over again when we start teaching online. So yeah, Pranema says true. That's exactly what it feels. We feel like beginners again when we teach online. So I first started teaching online in 2007. So I think what happened was our director of ESL and TESOL programs at the time looked at me and said, well, she's one of the youngest teachers that we have, and the older teachers don't want to teach online. We have this program that was online. They needed a teacher. And so they approached me just because they thought I might be a little more technologically savvy than some of the veteran teachers. They asked if I was willing to teach the class, and I said, sure, okay, let's give it a shot. And since then, I've taught hundreds of students in live synchronous classes like this, and more than 1 million students through my video courses online. So for many years, it was asynchronous, which is a term that means it's not live training. It's where they just access a portal at any time. But many years also have been synchronous training, like we're doing right now. This is that live training, that synchronous training. So the good news is that everybody fails in the beginning when they start online teaching. I've failed many times when teaching my students online. I think back at some of those early classes that I taught that were not engaging, not fun, not successful for the students, and I cringe. You know, you think about how I've learned so much over the years because I failed so much at online teaching. And then at other times throughout my career, I've seen that online learning can be so engaging for students. There have been successes. I've connected with students and helped lead them into light bulb moments, even online, and watched them take huge learning leaps online. It's totally possible to do. So, since most of us are new, if anybody's brave enough to share, would anyone like to share in the chat box an online teaching fail? And maybe there was a lesson that went really miserably, or maybe there was, I've had this happen several times where a student just completely walks off camera, goes to another room, does who knows what, it's just as MIA is gone. Do you have any online teaching fails you would like to share with the group? All right, Tony shares that I felt like I was talking to myself. I hate that. Yes, I know exactly how you feel. Definitely know how you feel. Anyone else brave enough to share your online teaching fails? I've had more technological fails than I care to admit, where either my technology wasn't working or theirs wasn't working, not feeling lively, right? There's an energy that happens in the face-to-face classroom that we don't always feel in the online classroom. We can feel like not lively. It can feel dull. Yes, I asked the students to unite, but none of them did. You tried to get them in groups, they wouldn't do it maybe. Technical problems. Don't like it when students are not in the same room as me. I hear you, and hopefully we'll have some tips for you today to make it feel a little better. I feel like this won't be on par with face-to-face. That's a totally valid feeling. And I would say, depending on the course material, there are some classes that don't work well face-to-face. For example, music classes don't work as well online as they do face-to-face. But I'm a real believer that there's some really rich experiences that students can get online. And we'll talk about some of those today. All right, the unmute button. Oh goodness, the dreaded unmute button, right? We've heard that 100 times. Sorry, are you on mute? All right, not enough time to satisfy all the questions. Many times we don't understand if the students are following us. I'm going to help you with that today. All right, sometimes students do the off camera and they go away. You search for them, you feel disappointed. I've been there, I feel that way sometimes. I would encourage you, well, we'll talk about it in a minute. I'll save that. All right. The overconsciousness kills the joy of teaching. I hear you. I will say it gets better. The more you teach online, the more comfortable and normal it feels. Just like when you were teaching in the regular classroom, it starts to feel normal. Students from the rural area, so many unexpected problems there. I feel you, Swarna. Thank you for sharing, everybody. All right, so I'm going to talk about a couple. Let's ask this one more question here. What are some roadblocks that prevent student engagement in the classroom? We've already heard technical issues, but what are some other ones? We have students walk away. Share that in the chat with us. What are some roadblocks that prevent student engagement? Keeping multiple browsers open, absolutely. We have all those tabs at the top, right? Those students that, they just want to click around while we're talking. Poor technical equipment, less internet speed, I hear you. That's a real challenge that a lot of teachers face. One thing that does help with that, and that's something that Dhruv encouraged today, is if you don't have great bandwidth for your class, have people turn off their cameras. I would prefer cameras on, but if bandwidth is an issue, then you can turn off those cameras, and that does help with bandwidth. If a teacher's not expressive. Okay, wonderful. These are some great roadblocks to share. So let's talk about some that I thought of as well. Student engagement roadblocks, device distraction. So we talked about too many tabs, that's the second one, too many browsers open, or their devices, right? If their cameras are off, they just might grab their phones and start working, start chatting with their friends online, whatever it is. There's a lot that distracts even adults, and when we get into high school students or younger, there is a lot of distraction there with devices and tabs and that kind of thing. Technology issues, you guys mentioned it, it's true. This is something that it's one of the great challenges we face here in the fall of 2020, as many school systems are about to reopen or get into the swing of their school year. No quiet space for learning. We didn't mention this one, but this is something that students and teachers can face. You may not have a dedicated office to teach, and you have other people that you share your home with, or our students face the same thing. They're online learning and their brother is sitting right next to them talking to a different teacher online, and the background noise can be overwhelming. That distraction can be pretty rough. More anonymity equals less participation. This is what you mentioned before about, when they turn that camera off and they just disappear. When we're not face to face and confronted with the fact that we need to participate, it can be easy to check out. And then lack of personal connection. So a lot of you have already mentioned this. I'm afraid this will never feel as interactive as face to face. Because part of that is that lack of personal connection. We're not in the same room right now. And so those can be some of those roadblocks that we face. So I want to mention the 80-20 rule that I generally try to follow. This is both in live classes or face-to-face classes and online. And the 80-20 rule is that students participate 80% of the time and teachers talk 20% of the time. So this is primarily a rule I follow in my language classrooms, specifically language classrooms, because I think it's so important for students to be using language and growing that language. Some of you might say, how do students participate 80% of the time in an online classroom and teachers only talk 20% of the time? Well, there's lots of different ways. I would suggest, writing in their daily journal, answering a question in the chat. Even though I'm talking a lot right now, I keep directing you guys back to the chat because I want you guys to participate. That's something you can do with your students, regularly having contributing. And then leading small group discussions. We'll talk about how to do that a little bit in a moment. Silent reading. This is a way for students to participate, is to do silent reading. Working on grammar exercises. All of these are suggestions of how they can participate and ways they can do it. But I try to do this in my face-to-face classes as well as online, because that interaction is what's going to drive language learning. All of us learn by doing. English students don't need us to they don't need to passively sit while their teacher talks on and on and on. They will check out, they will disengage. Because don't you? When you're learning something that even maybe you're not excited to learn, if someone is talking the entire time and never engaging you, how does that make you feel, right? So we want to always be engaging our students and having them contribute. So it's a lot harder to do online. And when I say that, I mean, it's just a lot more, you have to bring some more intentionality to this situation. So let's talk about, let's see, yeah. Well, okay, so we have a great question in the chat. Student participation 80% of the time is not possible in large classroom like 100 students. And Karendeep, I would say it's difficult, but I would also say it's actually possible. So that's when we can break students up into smaller groups. We can have them participating with activities. So for example, if I put up an activity here on my screen that I'm sharing, and there are 10 blanks for them to fill out, they can actively be participating by sitting and working on that on their own desk. So even though they may not be participating to the whole group, they are still actively engaging. They're still doing something. So the key is not necessarily that they're interacting with the whole group, but they just need to be actively engaging, actively participating. But that's a great point. It is challenging to think about. So let's talk about 10 ways to increase student engagement in the online language classroom. So number one, cameras should be on if bandwidth allows. So again, we limited it today just because of bandwidth. But when you are with a class day after day, and you have the same class every day, if they have enough bandwidth, and I know that's a big if, I know I can already feel you pushing back, but if they have enough bandwidth, and if you have enough bandwidth, cameras should be on. So why do I say that? Well, at the very least, your camera should be on, okay? If you can do it, please put your camera on for everyone to see you, because there's nothing like a human face that to encourage interaction. If your students are only looking at a load of boring text that you're putting up on a PowerPoint, then they won't connect language to the context of social interaction. So language is by nature social. It's how we connect with each other. And if there is no human face ever connected to that language, there's going to be a disconnect for our students. So at the very least, your student or your camera needs to be on so they can get that facial interaction. Human faces make us happy. When someone is smiling at us, we feel happy, right? So your students need to see you at the very least. And of course, if you have enough bandwidth, then everyone can turn their cameras on so they can feel known in that space. So you might be very shy about having a camera on and think, you know, I'm not camera ready today. I don't want to be on camera, but it's actually for the benefit of your students, especially language students. So think about this. If I'm teaching language and I'm teaching pronunciation, for example, and I want to show how to make the TH sound, and I put my tongue between my teeth and I say, it sounds like this. Right? If my camera's on, my students can see me. They can see how my sounds are being formed. They can see the types of facial expressions we make when we speak English. And they can also better understand you if they can see your facial expression. So cameras on is definitely something I recommend. Even if it's just you, turn that camera on. You can feel alone, but you're helping your students feel less alone. Oops, number 2. And if anyone's wondering, I will forward you this slide deck after the session. So number 2 is use a good microphone. So today, you may be able to see, I have a microphone here. This is the Yeti Blue microphone. It wasn't too expensive. It was under $100. But it's something I invested in a while ago. If you know you're going to be online teaching for a long time, I would recommend investing in a good microphone. So you might be asking, why is this a student engagement tip? What difference does a microphone make with student engagement? Isn't this just technical advice? Well, I would say that it's both. Have you ever listened to someone over a webinar or a Zoom meeting and the audio kept breaking up or making some crazy noise? Or maybe you get lots of background noise when someone's speaking, and it's incredibly distracting. It's definitely hard to focus when you're just thinking about how bad the audio quality is. So a good microphone is actually a priceless tool for the online teacher, especially in the language classroom, where what we say is actual input for them. How they hear us is important. It's how the input that they're getting in order to become better English speakers. So this, a good microphone is key. So you might be wondering, well, is my microphone good enough? How do I know this? So here's what I would recommend. I would recommend you open up Zoom or whatever platform you use, and you record yourself teaching in your normal voice that you would teach in with your microphone, and you record that, and then you do about a minute or 2 of sample, and then you go back and listen to it yourself and ask yourself the important question, is this audio distracting to me? It doesn't have to be perfect, but is it distracting? Are there issues with the audio quality to where my students, A, can't understand me, or B, would be likely to tune me out because it's a frustrating noise to listen to? My third recommendation for student engagement is to utilize the chat. So we've been doing it a lot today. You guys have been great participating as I've asked some questions. And the chat is a great opportunity for writing practice. it's not just for quick communication. We can actually get real valid writing practice here. It's a great opportunity for those shy students who hate to speak up to the group. So they get that language practice in the chat. So I once had a student in the face-to-face classroom who was incredibly shy. He was so shy, he would have his friends translate for him. I would try so hard to engage him in the class, but I always had to call on him. I was always pulling him out. He hated speaking up in the group. And I just thought, well, his language is really limited. He doesn't have those skills. And then one day, even though it was a live face-to-face class, I took my entire class to the computer lab. We all sat in the same room, but we only communicated via the chat box. And all of a sudden, this really shy student came alive. He was chatting it up with everybody. He was making funny jokes, commenting on other people's comments that they had made. And I realized this student's issue was not his language ability. It was the way that he didn't want to be speaking. He probably didn't feel confident with the way he sounded. He didn't want to do that in the class, but he came alive in that chat room. And so, yeah, and Dr. Lena has said that she's experienced this as well. This is key. Engage those students in the chat. Don't just look at it as, don't dismiss it as just a fun little way to engage. It's actually a way for students to improve their language and get that language practice. It's also a great way to give feedback. So you might pose a question, have everyone respond, and then you look at the responses and you say, okay, what are the general errors that a lot of people are making here? And let's address those. So that's a great way to see kind of a consensus really quickly. What are the errors we're dealing with in this area? Yeah, Kavita says this also improves confidence. Definitely. It's a great practice for writing. So utilize that chat. Use it all day long. The only thing I would say is that you just need to make sure, especially depending on the age of your students, to encourage them to use it, but not to distract from the subject matter. So if they're chatting about what you're talking about and they're talking about what you're talking about, wonderful, just like you guys are doing today. That's amazing chat participation. But sometimes there's those who want to distract, those, especially those younger students, they want to just make jokes or something. That's kind of behavior you have to monitor some. But for the most part, encourage it. Tell them, ask me any question anytime. And that can come out there. They can point out spelling errors. Harmeet, that's a great point. In the chat, it doesn't autocorrect usually. It won't autocorrect what people are typing out. And so it's a great chance to practice spelling. Let's talk about number 4. The number 4 way of engaging is to frequently review the learning outcomes. And I wrote, stay connected to the why. So our students have to stay connected to their why in order to stay motivated. So you might regularly want to mention, why are they learning English? Why is this lesson today important in their life? For example, why is this webinar you're attending important? Well, you're going to need these tools coming up, maybe even on Monday or whenever your next class is, you need these tools. So keep people connected to their why. When people are really connected to why they do something, they stay motivated and they stay excited about what they're learning. All right, make use of breakout rooms. So if you are brave enough to do this, this is one of those next level student engagements, but I highly encourage it. This is one where I've had lots of successes and also lots of failures, but it's worth trying. Make use of breakout rooms. So breakout rooms are small virtual rooms where you can take a large group and divide them up into much smaller groups. So you're talking about a class of 100 people, for example. You can break them up into groups of 4, and then there would be 25 classrooms where 4 people are alone in a room interacting and talking about the activity. Again, you're going to have great successes in this area with the majority of the students, and there will be some rooms that totally flop, fail, they don't work because they don't participate. But it's worth the risk because it's what we do it's best practice, in the language teaching spheres, to get people talking, get them in smaller groups so that they can communicate and collaborate. One good reason also to use breakout rooms is it helps people feel connected. So we can't discredit this. When we are in the virtual space, we often feel alone. I'm sitting alone in a room right now. I feel like I'm talking to myself, right? And your students feel the same way. So we can't discredit how alone some people are going to feel through virtual learning. So we need to connect them not just to you, but also to other students so they feel a part of the group, and then they will engage if they feel a part of the group. All right, so Dr. Atul says, breakout rooms is a good feature. However, moving from one room to another for a teacher is a little time consuming. I totally agree with you. So that's kind of where you have to play with it and try it out. Sometimes you're going to be able to visit all of the rooms. Let's say you have a group of only 20 students. That's feasible to visit all those breakout rooms. It's probably not feasible with 100 students if you're trying to visit 25 rooms. So instead, if you're not able to go visit each of those rooms and interact with those groups individually, that's okay. Instead, you may want to have a report out at the end of it. So you make sure that there's one person who's leading the group, and you can either choose that or it can be random. They can choose it themselves. And then they come back and they report out in the chat about what they discussed. So you might say, you're going in to talk about these 3 questions. And when you come out, I want one member of your group to report out on what you discussed. And so at the very least, you have one representative from those groups who are engaging, right? And then you don't have everyone responding. But that's where you put that power a little bit in their hands to stay motivated and get that content out in a smaller setting. I guarantee the reward is outweighs the risk in many cases. Yeah, so they're saying, yeah, true. My students have found this option very interesting. So how does one keep check on what they're doing? So that's where I kind of mentioned, you can either jump into those rooms, and if you have a smaller group, you can. There's also an option that if they're having issues in that room, for some reason, someone's audio isn't working, or maybe they feel stuck on a question, they should be able to ask for help. And there's some functionality where they can ask for help. And if you see a room is struggling, you can jump in there and help them. Or you can use what I talked about with the report out at the end. So you can't be in every room. So this is where you have to trust your students a little bit to do some of that work on their own. But you can check in with some of them, and then you can have them report out at the end. So how to break them into a group and monitor them. So it depends on what platform you're using. So in Zoom, you would just go to the top panel and you would find that functionality there. And they're usually called breakout sessions or breakout rooms. You can also just Google how to do it. There are, I'm sure, great articles about how to set up breakout rooms. They might take a little bit of preparation before class starts, but try it out. You know, it's worth trying it out because they are very valuable. Someone said they conducted an oral exam using this feature of the breakout rooms. It worked very well. I totally agree. It's definitely the reward is worth the risk, in my view. Okay. Another piece of advice for online engagement: avoid text-heavy slides. So what do I mean by that? It means that if you use PowerPoint, Prezi, or another presentation tool while teaching, make sure that you limit the amount of words on the slide. And we love our words. We're language teachers. We love them. We love to talk. We love to read. We love all kinds of words, right? But our students don't. And it's not just that they don't like them. They literally cannot concentrate on what they're reading and what you're saying at the same time. So if you have text on the screen, instantly, at least half the class is going to read the text. So they will only be focused on what's on the screen and they can't hear you. It's very difficult to read and listen to two different things. So what I encourage is the 4x5 rule. So you should limit your words to 4 bullet points with a maximum of 5 words per bullet. So you don't want giant paragraphs if you're going to talk about something else. Now, there are instances where you do introduce a lot of text in class, right? There are certainly times for that. I'm just saying that if you're lecturing about a topic and the slide is there to support what you are currently saying, then make sure that slide has limited words. They can't do two things at the same time. So I like to do that. Now let's talk about situations where it's appropriate to have a lot of text on the screen. Number one, when you display text for students to read along with. So you can either have students read the slide silently or have a student read the slide for the whole class. It's that participation. Or you can read it yourself. I recommend getting a student involved. You know, anytime you can break up the monotony of your voice or my voice, then that's a good thing. You bring in that student and read that text-heavy slide. But the key to having a lot of text on the screen in that situation is that you can't say something different than what's displayed because they can't listen and read two different things. So if there's a lot of text on the screen, that's a moment where you're going to read it together or have them read it silently. Another situation where it's appropriate to introduce a lot of text in the class is when you're doing a class-wide editing activity. I love these. So one activity I like to do with my writing classes is to display a paragraph on the screen that has errors on it. I'm sure you've probably done something like this in your face-to-face classroom, but it's possible to do here online because there is something called annotation tools. And we don't have annotation capability today, but there's a good chance that your online platform does have that capability. Annotation tools are the ability for students to take their virtual marker or their virtual text box and they write on your screen. So everyone's writing at the same time, or you can choose one student to write on there, but everyone has a chance to write on top of whatever is showing on that screen. Those are called annotation tools. And those are a great situation. You put up that paragraph that needs editing, and then everyone comes and annotates on it. They edit it themselves, or maybe you just call for 3 volunteers to help and do it. But it's a great way to have a lot of text and have them participate with it. Note that annotation tools are color coded. So each student has a different color. And so you can identify who has written what. And a lot of times you can ask, you know, who has this red one right here? Why don't you share why you made that change? All right, number 7. Surprise your students. Surprise! If your students always know what's coming next, then they may be tempted to check out. So a lot of us like to say up front, here's what we're going to talk about today. For 10 minutes, we're going to do this. For 20 minutes, we're going to do this. For 10 minutes, we're going to do this. Because we have our lesson plans ready. We know what we want to do, right? But I would encourage you, especially in that virtual space, kind of hold some of that back because that element of surprise will actually keep your students engaged. I also like to add surprising elements like visual props or some music, a piece of music, a surprising story, a great video to share that complements what you're talking about. Anything that's going to surprise and delight your students to where if they checked out for a minute, they're focused again. You want to do that. Even if it's something as silly as a picture of a dancing cat or a GIF of a dancing cat. You want to do something surprising to keep their attention. Have fun with the whiteboard. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier, and I would love to hear in the chat box, how many of you have used whiteboards before virtually? Let me know in the chat. Have you ever used a whiteboard? All right, we have one who says I have. Not a lot. Just one so far has said I have. So what is a whiteboard? So we have whiteboards in our face-to-face classrooms, right? It's where we can write anything on there. These different, okay, one other person says I once in a trial on Bongo. Great. Never used a whiteboard, only prepared PowerPoints. Okay, whiteboards, if you have that functionality, are wonderful. It's the same exact concept that you have in your face-to-face classroom, that physical whiteboard, except it's virtual. So again, people can turn on their annotation tools, they can add text to it, they can draw pictures to it, you can play Pictionary on it, you know, anything. Those possibilities are endless with that virtual whiteboard. You can even draw a picture or write some notes on there. So if you have that functionality, I encourage you to use that whiteboard because the possibilities really are endless. Has anyone ever had a fun activity that they've done that they would like to share here in the chat? What's a fun way that you have used the whiteboard if you have used it before? All right, no responses yet. Let me know, what's a fun activity on the whiteboard that you've done before? The virtual whiteboard, I have to clarify. I don't see any coming in yet. We'll wait just a minute. Asked to create a story with a poem, not on virtual. So a lot of us don't have experience with it. This is one of those, I'm giving you homework. Go out, research what whiteboards can do, and go out and have fun with it. Just play with it. See what you can do. Don't be afraid of it. Get in there and try it out. A one-sentence story. Ooh, that's a good idea on a virtual whiteboard. I like that. All right. Number 9, creatively convert your favorite in-class games or activities to the virtual space. So this is where, you know, a lot of you are 4 months or 6 months into this online teaching thing. In the beginning, it's survival. I totally understand that. You're doing the basic thing that you know how to do. You're taking it as far as your technological limits take you, and you're nervous. You just want to get the content from you to them, right? You're just trying to survive that first little bit. After that first survival period, I just encourage you to think really creatively about how you can translate good practice, best practice in your live classroom into the virtual space. So this is going to take a little bit of creativity, but any game or fun activity or really successful activity that you have done in the live face-to-face environment can probably be translated in some way to the online space. At first you might say, no, I don't think this can happen. I only know how to do this face-to-face. But I bet there's some creative technological solution. If you're really stumped on how to convert something, send me an email. I'll help you brainstorm those ideas. But you want to find, if at all possible, creative ways to still stay fun and engaging even though you're not together. You can do it. There's a lot of creative different ones. I'll give you one suggestion here. This would be for beginning English students. I like to play the game I Spy when talking about descriptive adjectives in my face-to-face classroom. And so I thought, well, if you don't know the game, it's where you say, I spy with my little eye something red. And then other students say, is it Yoshi's sweater? No, it's not Yoshi's sweater. Is it that decoration? No, not the decoration. So in the live face-to-face environment, they are getting practice with adjectives, descriptions, nouns that they may not know what is that called. You know, they're getting that practice. And I thought, how do I bring this into the virtual environment? Well, the way you can do that is if you have camera capability, everyone turns on their cameras. And if the audio then stops working and you need to use the chat to play the game, you can do that. But you play I Spy where people look in the backgrounds of everyone else's cameras. So someone might say, I spy with my little eye something green. And someone might say, well, is it Sabina's shirt? No, it's not Sabina's shirt. Is it Trupti's folder? No, it's not Trupti's folder. Is it Andrea's plant? Yep, it's Andrea's plant. So you can play I Spy in that virtual space. It just takes some creativity to think, how can I translate my favorite things that I do in the classroom into the virtual space? And again, if you get stuck and need some ideas, email me and I'll help you out. All right, the last one I want to share today is to have your students share their screens. So you're probably hearing warning bells right away. What we may not know what's on our students' screens, right? That's where you have to gauge as a teacher of whether it's appropriate for your school system or the age of your students, or you know, also to have those disclaimers of everyone close all your other tabs before you share the piece of writing that you're working on. But have your students share their screens. So even in a class of 100, I keep going back to that because it's kind of that extreme example. Even in that class of 100, you ask for 3 volunteers. Today, you all did the homework that I assigned you last night. Today, we're going to look at what did you write? And I want 3 volunteers to show me what you write. And as a class, we're going to give suggestions in the chat about ways you can improve your writing and also what's good about it. So you pass control to a student that you trust, who you know isn't going to have anything open in the background or, you know, other distracting things like a message or anything else. You share that, and then other students can participate and engage by commenting about that student's writing. It's also a great way for you as the teacher to give live feedback to those students. And so that they get that feedback that they would get if you were just looking over their shoulder. A shared screen is just like looking over their shoulder in the classroom. It's a good one. It's ripe for feedback. Our students want to stay connected to us. They're feeling alone. They're feeling just as strange as you and I are feeling. And so they want to have that interaction. They want to know that someone notices them, right? They want to know it. And so that's a great opportunity to make sure that those students are feeling seen and that they're also engaged. If it's their writing, they're engaged. They're going to pay attention to what you have to say about their writing. So that's my suggestion. So I would love to hear, these are just 10 ideas that I have. There are many, many more. And I know we have a wealth of experience here in the group today. So please, in the chat box, tell us what are some suggestions that you didn't see today that have worked for you that you would like to share with the group? what additional pieces of information, let's go back. What additional pieces of advice would you give about improving student engagement? Polls are very effective. Yeah, I didn't mention those today. That's a great suggestion. Using online polls and surveys, so you can say, you can have a question on your screen and you give students the option A, B, C, or D. What is the correct answer here? And in that online poll, it can show you what percentage of the students got it right or wrong. And it's a more efficient way to get response than the chat, because then other people also can't see what other people are writing. In the poll, they have to answer on their own and they won't see the answer until they've answered. Yeah, they work like class quizzes. Perfect. Yeah, what other great ideas do you have for student engagement online? You can share the results on polls. That's a great point. What other ways have you engaged your students online that I missed today? I'll give you one more minute. I will say, don't be afraid of the silence of online learning. Leave space. You don't have to talk the whole time. You can wait for your students, right? So what other ideas do we have for student engagement? Thank you, Dr. O'Toole. You can talk one-on-one. Absolutely. Good old-fashioned one-on-one. So some of you are teaching one-on-one tutoring, or maybe you have a group of only 8 students. That's a great opportunity. You tell people, and I didn't even mention this, but tell people, take yourself off mute and let's talk about this one topic. Let's discuss this together. Or can I have 2 people do a mock conversation? So, you call on 2 people, you unmute them, you as the teacher stay silent, and then they can interact with each other. It's a great point. Get those students talking if you can. So tell me then, does anyone have any questions for me? You can drop those in the chat or you can take yourself off mute and ask. You tell your students to feel free to call you, maybe on WhatsApp. Okay, absolutely. If there's a student that's facing technological issues, especially, you want to make sure that they have your contact information so that they can contact you if they're somehow locked out of the room, or if there's some issue they're facing, or just a general question. How can they contact you? Make sure you give that information on the front end before you start the class. All right, how frequent should the comments and quizzes be? So I would just recommend whatever is best practice in your live face-to-face environment should be best practice in the virtual environment as well. As much as you can, try to keep the same kind of pace and ratio that you would. At first, it's going to be slower, but in that situation with online learning, what I didn't get into today are all those fun activities and materials and videos you can share online and have students do pre-work before they come into the class so that they're prepared just for discussion or participation. But it just depends on your curriculum and the needs of your students, how often those quizzes should be. All right, are there any effective ways of giving feedback for assignments and homework without creating complete chaos in the class? I love this. Yes, there's plenty of ways of giving feedback for assignments. So one way would be if your students submit homework or assignments online, so in your LMS, your learning management system, whether that be Blackboard, Moodle, something like that, Canva, if they turn in homework there and you've had a chance to review it before the class, let's say. So I like to have students submit their assignments before they come to class so I have a chance to review it. What I might do is if it's a small class, I might talk say who's comfortable with having me pull their homework up and we can all look at it together and I can give feedback. And so we would have that participation there. If it's a larger class, I might take screenshots or I might copy paste sections from each student's homework and show 5 different examples. Hey, here are 5 pieces of homework. This was good, better, best. This was a good answer to this question. This was a better one, and here's a best one. And you share that on your screen, and you have some control over that. Yeah, okay, let's see here. Undergrad and postgrad students are required to submit assignments. How is this possible? Well, there are many different ways to submit assignments. Again, I'm just talking about these live calls today, the synchronous component, but that asynchronous component, that part where they can submit their information, that is best on a learning management system. So I personally use Teachable, and I'll include a link to that in when I send you the slide deck. But there are many different ones. Moodle is a free one, Blackboard, any of these LMSs, you can find those, and it's a whole different world. I could teach a whole other webinar on it. But these learning management systems are basically like your own personal class website where students can upload files. You can put assignments in there. You can grade assignments in there, and everything can be submitted into one location so that you're only going to one place to grade everything. Because if everyone just emails you their assignments, it's chaos. It's a big mess. And so I recommend a learning management system, whatever that is, LMS. Just Google that and then find out what's a good free one that you can play with and start out with. Your school should have recommendations or should have an LMS that they use as well. Google Classroom is also a really great place to start. It's very robust, but I would recommend an LMS. All right, let me look at a couple more questions. Let's see here. Okay, so someone with more than 100 students doesn't want to break them up into groups. What's other ways to engage them? So I would just go back to some of the ways that I talked about today of having fun with that whiteboard, avoid those text-heavy slides. Let's see, what else? Utilizing the chat. So here's the deal. If you have a group of 100 students, I might say this. If your name starts with a K, it's your turn. Go into the chat and tell me what part of speech is whatever. Or if your birth month is January, it's your turn. I want to hear from you. And so then what you're doing is if you have a group of 120 students, it's chaos if 120 students are chatting at the same time. By saying something like that of, okay, if your birth month's in May, it gets down to less than 10% of the students. And now we're having real interaction between a smaller group. So any way that you can focus in on a group and get that participation without it being chaos, I hear you about that. I would just recommend the whiteboard. In those larger classes, you will have to have a little more control and a little more of the microphone. But you can still ask for volunteers for things. You can still say, I need a volunteer to answer question number 3. Raise your hand. A lot of these have raise hand functions. And so they could raise their hand. The first one who does that, you take them off mute and then they participate one-on-one there. Schoolology is a good platform. Thanks, Tony. If the students make grammatical mistakes in the chat, when should we correct them? Well, I mean, there's different philosophies about feedback. I would just say it depends on the situation. If they're saying, hi teacher, how are you today? And they spell something wrong, I wouldn't correct them there. But if it's something where you specifically say, everybody, give me your best guess on how you spell encyclopedia. in that situation, that's one where you've set up to where there's kind of a right way of doing it and a wrong way of doing it. And that's a great chance to give some feedback there. Or I would love everyone to give me the sentence they wrote for number 3 in the chat. And then you can look at generally what's being answered, and you don't have to call people out by name, but you can say, I see one answer that says X. And so the better way of saying that is da, da, da. So feedback is kind of an art. I don't overuse it, but I try not to underuse it because it is important. Okay, how do you bring those students to chat who never participate? So you're going to have more of an awareness on this if the class is smaller. But the best way to do that, I would say, would be to, instead of doing a chat, do a poll. And so there you can see what the numbers are. So if you have a class of 50 students and you're only getting 30 responses, you can say, I'm not hearing from 20 of you. Let's see if as a class, we can get all the way up to 50. And then the next question you ask, there's only 45. Ooh, 5 of you are still holding back. I'm going to find you. Here we go. Let's get up to 50 as a class. And you want to make it kind of a collaborative thing where let's get everybody participating. You want to make it a party they want to be a part of. And so that's what I would encourage there. All right. These are great questions, and we are going to wrap it up in just a minute. Yeah, great. All right. So let me just remind you again of how you can contact me. I would love to hear from you. Feel free to reach out or join me on any of my platforms. These platforms are all for English learners, but I do have some teacher material at ESL Basics. I just want to thank you so much for joining today. I love learning new things from you. I love meeting teachers around the globe. And I thank you for giving me an hour of your time today. Thank you also to ISEL for hosting me today. I really appreciate it. And good luck to all of you as you teach online. If I can ever help you in any way, please do let me know.
Thank you, Andrea, and every participants. It was a lively session in the chat, as well as the interaction we've had will hopefully help all of us in our day-to-day tasks as we move forward. ISEL is also going to bring a newsletter. Andrea, we would also look forward to your contributions in the same, and maybe we can include the things that you have outlined today in
Sure.
some of our editions.
I'll be happy to send that out this week. I've written up a post about it, so I'll have all that information ready.
Sure. All right. Sounds good. Thank you, everyone. Take care and stay safe out there. Bye.